This delegation event model of event handling mechanism. That is, here as far as applet programming is concerned, here as I told you, there are a number of applets which are transported via the net, and on the back end of your internet browser there may be a number of applets, and depending on the key press or the mouse dragged or the clicking of the mouse, these events or these applets are instantiated and it will do the job. Okay, then delegation event model means you have a number of sources for generating events. For example, suppose that you have a mouse and mouse is generating an event like, say, clicking the mouse. Another event generated by the mouse is dragging the mouse or double clicking the mouse or scrolling the mouse. So a number of operations are done by the mouse, and mouse is a source of event generation. Mouse is a source. Another one is keyboard. Keyboard is generating, say, press your key, then release your key, then you can have a number of, say, alt plus key or control plus key. That means a number of events can be generated by the keyboard as well. So here we have a number of event sources like mouse, keyboard, then can have a number of sources are there. So suppose that you are browsing the net, and suppose that you are running an application or internet application, and in that run internet application, suppose that you are pressing one key, say submit button, and when you are pressing that submit button, then the mouse clicked event is generated. That is an event, and depending on that mouse clicking event, some applet may be running, some applet will be called and it will do the operation. So some other suppose that there is a scrolling window, and from that suppose you have selected some attribute from that, then depending on that some other events may be generated, and depending on that event generated by the mouse, then an event is generated, and depending on the event generated some other applet may be running. That means in your GUI the mostly and widely used source is your mouse. Keyboard is used as well, and that mouse and keyboard may be generating a number of events. Apart from mouse and keyboard, other sources are also there, and if you have a source, it will create an event object. That means the listener object. For example, suppose that you have a submit button, and in that submit button, if you are pressing that submit button, then that is an event. When you are pressing that submit button, an event will be generated, and that event notification that notification will be given to all listener objects who are registered with this event source. That means you have an event source, and suppose that a particular listener object registers under this source. Okay, then every event generated by that source will be sent to the listener object. For example, if you are pressing that submit button, then suppose that there is an object and there is a listener object, and who has already been registered with this mouse, and this notification will be sent to that listener object, and that's the method. So when you are pressing that listener button or when you are pressing that submit button, what will happen? This event source is generating an event, and that event will be sent to a listener object, for that submit button, and the listener object will implement an interface on this event. What to do on this event? For example, mouse clicked event. Suppose that the mouse is clicked, and if you are pressing that mouse clicking of the mouse, then that will be sent to some applet and that will do the job. That means here there are three things you have to consider. One is an event source, and there should be a listener object. There should be a listener object, and once you have a listener object here, that object is listening to this event and listening to the event source for some event notification. That means if you are registered, if you are registered under an event source, then that event source will notify or send all notifications on event generation to this listener object, and this listener object has to do the job, or what the event source wants to do, that is done by the listener object, and the listener object will do the job. For example, suppose that you have a submit button, then if you are pressing that submit button, then that will be sent to a listener object which is listening to this event, and when you are pressing that button, that will be done by an applet code which is intended for that submit button. Okay, that is the delegation event model. And here, when we are talking about delegation event model, we have to consider event handling, events, event source, event listener, event classes, action event class, adjustment event class, event source, event listener interface using delegation event model adapter classes. These are the things which we have to discuss. Now, event handling. Event handling is at the core of successful applet programming. Events are supported by java.awt.event package. The user generates most events to which your applet will respond. That means the user, suppose that a particular person is using a GUI, he may be typing something, or he may be using the mouse to click, say something, you have double clicking, then dragging, then etc. That means in the GUI, the end user may be doing a number of operations, and depending on those operations, events will be generated. These events are passed to your applet in a variety of ways. That means if you want, if suppose that an event is generated and that event is for starting a particular applet or program, and that will be done by the event listener. These events are passed to your applet in a variety of ways, the specific method depending upon the actual event. There are several types of events. The most commonly handled events are those generated by the mouse, the keyboard, the various controls such as push button. Events are supported by java.awt.event package. The modern approach to handling events is based on the delegation event model, which we have already discussed. A source generates an event and sends it to one or more listeners, and the listener simply waits until it receives an event. That means when you are clicking the mouse, the event listeners or mouse listeners which are registered for this source, that they are notified about the clicking of the mouse, and on that event generation, those listeners will implement the duties assigned by that event. Okay, the application logic that processes events is cleanly separated from user interface logic that generates those events. A user interface element is able to delegate the processing of an event to a separate piece of code. In the delegation event model, listeners must register with the source in order to receive an event notification. For example, if you want key pressed events, then add a key listener to key listener. If you want a mouse motion to be tracked, mouse motion event to be if you want a listener which which is operating upon mouse motion, then a mouse motion listener has to be registered by this listener to that event source. This provides an important benefit. Notifications are sent only to listeners that want to receive them. Three components in the event delegation model are event, listener and source. Events. In the delegation event model, an event is an object that describes a state change in a source. Events may be generated as a consequence of a person interacting with the elements in a graphical user interface or GUI. Some of the activities that cause events to be generated are pressing a button, entering a character via keyboard, selecting an item in a list, and clicking the mouse. These are all examples of events. Events may also occur that are not directly caused by interactions with the user interface, like an event may be generated when a timer expires, when a counter exceeds a value, a software or hardware failure occurs, and operation is completed. That means these are the sources of event generation. What is an event source? A source is an object that generates an event. This occurs when the internal state of an object changes in some way. Sources may generate more than one type of event. A source must register listeners in order for the listeners to receive notifications about a specific type of event. Each type of event has its own registration method. Public void add type listener. For example, suppose that you want a particular listener to be registered, then for that you have to use add type listener. Here type is the name of the event and EL is a reference to the event listener. The method that registers a keyboard event listener is add key listener. The method that registers a mouse motion listener is called add mouse motion listener. When an event occurs, all registered listeners are notified and receive a copy of the event object, also known as multicasting the event. That means if a number of listeners are registered for a particular event, then this event will be multicasted. In all cases, notifications are sent only to listeners that register to receive them. Some sources may allow only one listener to register. That means there are some sources they are allowing only one listener. General form of this is public void add type listener throws too many listeners exception. That means if more than one listeners want to register, then it will generate an exception or error. Type is the name of the event and EL is a reference to the event listener. When an event occurs, the registered listener is notified. This is known as unicasting the event. That means as this last one allows only one listener, then that event will be sent to a single listener, and that is called unicasting. A source must also provide a method that allows a listener to unregister an interest in a specific event. Suppose that a particular listener want no more notification for a particular source, then that can be done by remove type listener. That means that registration is revoked. Okay. Event listener. So till now we have been discussing about event source, and now event listener. Listener is an object that is notified when an event occurs. Listener has two major requirements. It must have been registered with one or more sources to receive notifications about specific type of events. It must implement methods to receive and process these notifications. That means these listeners should be registered with some source, and if such a notification arrives, then this listener should implement methods to process the notifications. Okay. The methods that receive and process events are defined in a set of interfaces found in java.awt.event. For example, the mouse motion listener interface defines two methods to receive notifications when the mouse is dragged or moved. Any object may receive and process one or more both of these events if it provides an implementation of this interface.